My name is Celeste Harmon, and I run a boutique architecture firm I built from scratch at 32 years old. I have designed homes for executives, restaurants that earned Michelin mentions, a community center in Phoenix that made the cover of Architectural Digest last spring. None of that mattered the night my aunt hosted her annual anniversary dinner at a restaurant in Scottsdale, and my mother pointed to a folding chair near the coatroom and said, quietly but firmly, "You can sit over there, sweetheart, we saved you a spot." She said it like she was doing me a favor. I didn't argue, I didn't make a scene. I smoothed my blazer, walked to that folding chair, and pulled out my phone. What I did next took less than 40 seconds. 18 minutes later, the dinner my cousin had been planning for 6 months started falling apart in real time right in front of me, and I watched every second of it. But I should start from the beginning because what happened that night didn't come from nowhere. It was the end of something that had been building my whole life. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing blueprints when my phone buzzed on my desk. Mom, we hadn't spoken since Christmas, and that conversation had ended with her telling me I needed to get my priorities straight because I'd skipped Easter to finish a client presentation. I stared at her name on the screen for a moment, then answered. Celeste. Her voice had that particular brightness she used when she wanted something. Your aunt and uncle are having their 30th anniversary dinner. The whole family will be there. She said the whole family, the way some people say the whole company, like a warning. When? I asked. Saturday the 14th. It's at Embers. You know, the steakhouse on Camelback, 7 o'clock. She paused. Don't be late. And don't make it about work. This is important to your aunt. I almost said I had a client call that evening. I didn't. I said, I'll be there. Because some part of me still believed that if I kept showing up, something would eventually shift. It never did. Growing up, my cousin Renata was the one they pointed to when they talked about success. She married well at 26, threw the kind of dinner parties that got photographed, and had a husband who worked in commercial real estate. She was the blueprint my family held up against me, never explicitly but always clearly. When I started my firm at 28, my mother's response was, "That sounds risky." When Renata redecorated her kitchen, my mother called me to describe it in detail. I was 32, an Arbany in a firm with 11 employees, and I still felt invisible in every room that had my mother in it. I told myself the dinner would be fine. I would go, eat well, say the right things, leave early. I had done it before. I got to Embers at 6:55. The restaurant was warm and loud, chandeliers throwing amber light across white tablecloths. A hostess led me to the private dining room in the back. Most of the family was already there. Aunts and uncles clustered near the bar cart, cousins catching up, kids running in small circles near the back wall. I scanned the room for my place at the table. I didn't see my name. There were 2 long tables set for the main family, already filled with place cards. Then, near the far wall, 2 small round tables had been pushed together beside a folding table stacked with anniversary gifts. My mother appeared at my elbow before I could ask. "You're over here," she said, guiding me with a hand on my back. She gestured to one of the small tables. There was a single place card, my name, in Renata's handwriting. I looked at the main tables. I looked back at mine. Why am I not? There wasn't enough room, my mother said quickly. Renata had a lot of people to seat. Don't make a thing of it. She was already walking away. I stood there for a moment with my clutch in my hands and the low-grade hum of family noise all around me, and I thought, this is exactly what they think of you. You are the person they put by the coat rack. You are the person who gets the folding chair, the afterthought placement, the table next to the gifts, because no one thought to move the gifts. I sat down. My uncle came by about 10 minutes later, clapped me on the shoulder, said good to see you, kid, and drifted back to the main table. My mother sat at the far end of the long table, next to Renata. They were laughing at something. Nobody from the main table looked my way. Renata came over to say hello. She was in a green silk dress, hair pinned up, the effortless glow of someone who had spent the afternoon at a spa. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the cheeks. "Glad you could make it," she said. "You've been so busy lately." I have, I said. She leaned down slightly, voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. I hope you don't mind the seating. We had a ton of my husband's colleagues, and I just had to prioritize, you know. Family is family. But these are important people. She straightened up. You understand. I looked at her. I understand perfectly, I said. She touched my arm and glided back toward the head of the table, where her husband was holding court with two men in suits. I recognized one of them. His name was Barrett Holloway, and he was the managing partner at Holloway Marsh Development, one of the largest commercial real estate firms in the Southwest. I had met him twice at industry events. More importantly, his firm had been trying to get a meeting with my company for 4 months. We were in the middle of quiet negotiations about a project in Tempe, a mixed-use development that would be the largest commission my firm had ever taken on. Renata's husband, it turned out, was one of Barrett's junior partners. They had no idea. I sat at my small table by the gift boxes, and I watched Renata's husband, whose name is Scott, laugh and gesture and perform his way through dinner. He had been one of the people who pushed back on our Tempe proposal. Too ambitious, he'd told Barrett's team in a meeting I wasn't supposed to know about. Overpromising for a firm their size. He'd advocated for a larger Chicago firm instead. I picked up my phone. I opened my messages to Vivienne, my business partner and the person who handled our client relationships. I typed, pull our Tempe proposal. Effective tonight. Send the formal withdrawal to Barrett's office first thing tomorrow. Don't wait for a callback. She responded in 3 minutes. Are you sure? This is the 4.2M. I typed back, I'm sure. And reach out to the Hendricks group. They've been waiting. Let's move. I put my phone down and picked up my wine. Dinner was served. Appetizers arrived at the main table first. Mine came 20 minutes later, delivered by a server who seemed confused about why I was seated separately. I ate quietly. I watched Scott refill Barrett's glass. I watched Renata touch her husband's arm every time he said something she wanted the table to notice. I watched my mother smile at Renata's mother-in-law and say something that made the older woman laugh with genuine warmth. The same warmth she never quite managed when it was directed at me. About an hour into dinner, Scott's phone buzzed. I saw him glance at it, frown. Glance again. He excused himself from the table. I watched him walk toward the hallway, phone at his ear. He was gone for about 7 minutes. When he came back, he leaned down to Renata and whispered something. Her smile flickered. She looked up, across the restaurant, at me. I raised my glass slightly. She stood up. She walked over. And her voice was different now. Quieter, tighter, with none of the breezy condescension from before. Celeste, what did you do? I had dinner, I said. Barrett's team just sent a withdrawal notice for the Tempe project. Scott said your firm pulled out. Her voice dropped further. He's been working on that account for weeks. Deals fall through, I said. She stared at me. You did this on purpose? I looked at her steadily. Renata, I've been sitting next to the coat rack all night because you decided I wasn't worth a seat at the table. I want you to think very carefully about what you're implying right now. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Scott pushed our proposal back to Barrett's team, I said, keeping my voice even. He called us too small. I agree with him. We're going to be too small to accommodate his timeline now, since we're committed elsewhere. That's just business. She looked like she'd been slacked without anyone touching her. This is a family dinner, she finally said, voice trembling. It is, I said, and I'm sitting at the family table, the small one by the gifts. She turned and walked back to her seat. I saw her bend to Scott, saw him pull out his phone again, saw the color in his face shift. Barrett leaned over, and whatever Scott said made Barrett's expression change from polite to concerned. My mother appeared at my table about 10 minutes later. She pulled out the other chair, the one that had been empty all evening, and sat down. What is going on? She said. I'm having a very nice dinner, I said. Renata is upset. Scott is upset. Barrett Holloway is... She stopped. Celeste, you know Barrett Holloway? We've been in negotiations with his firm for months, I said. The Tempe project, it's a $4.2 million commission. I took a sip of wine. Was, I should say. My mother stared at me. She had the look she always got when she realized she'd miscalculated something important, a kind of suspended disbelief, like she was waiting for a correction that wasn't coming. I didn't know, she said quietly. I know you didn't, I said. That's the thing about deciding someone doesn't belong at your table. You stop finding out what they know. She didn't answer. She sat there for a moment, her hands folded in front of her, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she looked genuinely uncertain. Barris Firm still wants to work with you? She finally asked. Barris Firm reached out to me directly, I said, not through Scott. They've been trying to schedule a meeting for months. What Scott told them in that back-channel conversation is between him and Barrett. But it didn't work out the way he planned. She was quiet again. Mom, I said, not unkindly, you put me next to the coatroom tonight. You've been putting me next to the coatroom my whole life. You do it so quietly that I don't think you even notice anymore. She flinched. It was small, but it was there. I just think, she started. I know what you think, I said. You think Renata has the kind of success that counts. The right husband, the right house, the right table at dinner. You've thought that since we were kids. I set my glass down. I stopped needing you to change your mind about it. But I'm not going to keep showing up and pretending I don't notice. She didn't respond. Across the restaurant, I could see Scott on his phone again, moving toward the hallway. Renata was sitting very still in her chair, not talking to anyone, her green silk dress suddenly looking less festive. My aunt and uncle were still at the head of the main table, blissfully unaware that anything had shifted. My uncle was laughing at something a cousin had said. My aunt was refilling her champagne. They'd been married 30 years. Whatever was unraveling 20 feet away from them wasn't about them, and I was glad for that. I finished my dinner. I said happy anniversary to my aunt and uncle, hugged them both, and meant it. On my way out, Barrett Holloway spotted me near the entrance. Celeste Harmon, he said, a smile crossing his face. I didn't expect to see you here. Small world, I said. I heard about the Tempe withdrawal. My team mentioned it tonight. He lowered his voice slightly. I want you to know that wasn't my call. There were some internal conversations that I wasn't fully briefed on, and I think we missed something. He paused. Are you open to restarting that conversation? Call my office Monday, I said. He nodded. We shook hands. I walked out into the warm Scottsdale night and the tightness I'd been carrying in my chest all evening. The tightness I'd carried for years, if I'm honest. Loosened in a way I hadn't expected. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine, not out of regret. I just needed to let the quiet settle. A week later, Renata called. I let it go to voicemail. She said she hoped we could talk, that things had gotten blown out of proportion, that family meant everything to her. Her voice was measured and careful, the way someone sounds when they've rehearsed. She mentioned Scott's project twice. She said she missed me. She didn't mention the coatroom. I didn't call back. My mother texted 3 days after the dinner. It said, I've been thinking about what you said. I don't know if I've been fair to you. I sat with that for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reversal of 32 years, but it was the first time she'd said anything that sounded like she was actually listening, and that was something. I texted back, thank you for saying that, and left it there. Barris' team and I restarted negotiations the following week. Without Scott as the intermediary, the conversations moved faster, cleaner. We signed a contract for the Tempe project 6 weeks later. The day the ink dried, Vivian brought a bottle of Prosecco to the office, and we drank it at my desk at 4 in the afternoon, with the blueprints spread out across the table. I kept the folding chair. Not literally, but I kept what it taught me. The people who put you by the coatroom are telling you something important about how they see the world. Once you understand that, you stop auditioning for a seat at their table. You build your own table. You decide who sits there. I know who I am. I built a firm from a single client and a laptop in a studio apartment. I've taken on projects that people told me were too big, too complicated, too much for someone like me, and every time I figured it out. Because that is what I do. I don't need my family to see it. I spent a long time wanting them to. But the night I sat alone by the gift table and watched my cousin's husband learn, in real time, what happens when you underestimate the person you put in the corner. That was the night I stopped waiting. It felt like freedom. It still does. I still think about that folding chair sometimes. The way my name was written on it in Renata's handwriting. Neat. Deliberate. Like she'd actually thought about where to put me and decided that was the right answer. That's the part that used to sting the most. It wasn't careless. It was considered. For a long time, I believed that if I just kept showing up, kept being present, kept being patient, the people I loved would eventually see me clearly. I thought proof was the answer. Build the firm, land the clients, earn the recognition, and one day they'd look over and realize they'd had it wrong. That's not how it works. I know that now. You can spend years stacking evidence of your own worth in front of people who have already decided not to look at it. The decision was never really about you. What I've come to understand is that actions carry weight that accumulates quietly and then lands all at once. Scott spent months working against our proposal in conversations I wasn't supposed to know about. Renata spent years managing the family's perception of me the way she managed her table seating, strategically, in her favor. My mother spent decades looking right at me and seeing something smaller than what was there. None of that happened in a single night. It built. And what happened at Embers? Built too, in the opposite direction, until the evening that both of those things arrived at the same dinner table. I'm not someone who believes in shortcuts. The firm I built took 4 years of working past midnight, of taking on projects that scared me, of betting on myself when nobody else was. That kind of work does something to you, not just to your resume but to the way you reason. You learn to think clearly under pressure. You learn to read a room, read a situation, understand what's actually being said beneath what's being said. When I looked across that restaurant and recognized Barrett Holloway, I didn't panic. I thought, that's a habit you build, not a talent you're handed. And there's something else that mattered that night. Something I don't think I gave myself credit for at the time. I could have made a scene. I could have confronted Renata loudly, embarrassed Scott in front of his clients, said all the things to my mother I'd been storing up for years. I didn't, because that's not who I am. I handled it cleanly, honestly, and within the bounds of my own business decisions. Scott's project didn't collapse because I attacked him. It collapsed because he'd spent months dismissing a firm whose contract he depended on, and I simply stopped pretending that was acceptable. There's a difference between revenge and consequence. I made a business decision. The rest followed from choices other people had already made. What I carry with me from that night isn't bitterness, it's clarity. About who I am, about what I built, about where I'm willing to sit and where I'm not. I spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never going to be set for me the way I deserved. I don't need it anymore. The table I've built has room for people who show up with integrity, who do the work, who tell the truth even when it costs them something. That's where I want to spend my time. Celeste Harmon is 32 years old and runs her own firm. That's not the ending. That's just the beginning of the part that finally belongs to her.